Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of CTLN Opinion Plus. My name is Savani Campos, and as you know, this is a space for the concerns and opinions of the Latino community. Before we start today, I would like to pause and say that the acts of violence, physical and verbal, against the Asian and Pacific Islander community are beyond reprehensible. And as an outlet for the Latino community, we at Latino News Network stand with the community and against all forms of racism and intolerance. That being said, we still have work to do, and we still have to talk about matters that concern the community, the Latino community. So this week we are welcomed by Joe Giulietti. Thank you very much for joining us, Joe.
No, happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Now we're going to talk about transportation, which I think is an issue that concerns everybody, and it's something that we often forget to talk about.
Well, you're talking to someone that has been a firm believer in it. I'm coming up on 50 years in it.
That's great. I have a question for you. We saw footage a few weeks ago of the Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg, cycling to work. How do you get to work every day?
Well, I'm very, very fortunate. I only live 3 miles from work. You know, almost all the time I am using a vehicle because I don't have the access to a bus to get over here. But I did grow up in New Haven where I used a bus every day.
And we rely heavily on public transportation. How has the DOT adjusted to the pandemic during this time?
You know, the pandemic has challenged us in so many different ways. You know, we initially began looking at what was going on with all of our bus drivers and making sure we were keeping the public and them safe, as well as the train operators and our people that were on the highway responding. What we had to do initially was to close off that front door and put up barriers to protect the bus drivers so that way there we could keep the transportation moving. What it meant was that we called it an honor system, but we basically lost the fares all the way through this period of time. The initial response was, though rail passengers went down by 80%, the bus passengers only dropped initially about 40%, and came back very, very quickly as people found that it was the main way to get to places of employment, to the hospitals, for our workers. So in some cases, we actually had to add more service on to go and deal with the pandemic. The other thing that was, and I'm sure you're hearing the same thing, more and more people are working from home using telecommuting, and it has changed all of our commuting patterns, and we're still trying to adjust to that. Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of the highways dropped initially about 40%. They're almost back to pre-COVID levels. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine, sir.
Okay, my screen got taken over by something else. Okay, so anyways, if you can hear me fine, with the highways that came back in, though they are almost back at pre-COVID levels, you got to remember that this pre-COVID level that we're seeing right now does not include all the ridership that is using mass transit. That mass transit ridership has not come back in, so we still have a lot to go in terms of what's going to be out there.
A few weeks ago, we spoke to the commissioner, Katie Dykes, and we talked about proposed legislation to reduce carbon emissions through changes in public transportation. How involved were you in the process of making those proposed legislations, and what is it looking like should it pass?
Well, I will tell you that Commissioner Dykes invited me when I first took the job in the beginning of 2019 to go to Boston to talk about these initiatives. And, you know, she was very, very pleased that I'd been one of the first commissioners that actually went to go and attend one of these hearings to talk about what needs to be done. And one, I immediately embraced it, as has the entire department. You know, we're truly looking at this from the standpoint that all the emissions that are coming out, even through the Midwest, end up going up into the air and being blown towards the East Coast, where it gets blocked by the ocean, and we end up being recipients of it. So we have higher asthma amounts here. We have, more issues in terms of health. Some people call it the tailpipe of the nation, and the fact that our air is not clean here. Very disappointing to know that, but also very encouraging from the standpoint that it's something that we can do something about. So we're engaged as a department. We've been working hand in hand with DEEP and with Katie Dyke's department, and I'm very, very pleased that we've got a lot of, initiatives that we've talked to the governor about, and a lot of things that we'd like to see going forward.
It's great that we're addressing carbon emissions, but I'm often concerned about what's the expense, and will communities be able to afford it?
Well, considering that the carbon emissions, with the cap on it, the most you're talking about is a 5-cent potential 5% increase in the cost of fuel. But, that truly comes down to what the wholesale costs are going to be. And, at the end of the day, that's money that we get to use for transportation enhancement. So it allows us to convert to electric transit buses. We've just launched two in Bridgeport. It allows us to put in more of the electric boat charging, and to emphasize the pedestrian bike safety improvements, traffic signal modernization, and it gives us the funds that we would need to be able to go and do these. We like to make the point that everyone is a pedestrian at some point of the day. So all of our transportation programs reflect sidewalk construction, complete street projects, multi-use trails and bike paths. And, we've got some great projects that we're working with here. So, again, I'm going to say that this is a way that you truly are going after the people that are doing the most polluting, and having them pay for some credits that will allow us to enhance everyone's clean air, and particularly what goes on into not only our urban areas and our rural areas, but it allows us to look at what is causing the most, of these emission problems. And believe me, we're not alone in this. I was just dealing with Virginia today on the same subject. So I'm actually very, very excited about some of the opportunities and what we can go and do with it, and how we can maintain affordable and accessible public transportation with these investments.
And talking about accessibility, you also mentioned that that there weren't certain bus stops available in certain areas. With these changes to transportation, are there going to be more bus stops available, more bike lanes available for people around Connecticut?
Yes, there are going to be. We've already built about 291 miles of trails for walking and biking. We also are looking at the fact that we're going to be able to turn around, all right, and just sat down with the city of New Haven. We're doing the same thing with Hartford, as we're looking at rationalizing our bus routes, rationalizing the ability on them, also looking at where do we put housing, to try and make sure that as we make our investments in the future, we're doing in a way that it always ties into the public transit, and it ties into the fact that most of the next generation is looking for livable, workable communities, and we're trying to make sure that it makes sense and that we've actually aligned all this up so that it'll work in the right way.
That's good to know. You also mentioned that everybody is a pedestrian. How available are bike paths in the state? And having studied in New York and having seen the scare of cyclists getting killed on the road, I'm terrified of such a thing happening in Connecticut. How do you see that from happening?
Well, before I came here, I was the president of Metro North, and one of the things that we had to work on there was connecting the bike trails, because the governor wanted a bike trail that went all the way from New York City up to basically up to Buffalo, so that way there, you had paths that went through. I was working on the ones that were in Carmel, and it's a wonderful project as you turn around and open up these, trails so that people can use it. I know what you're talking about in terms of the actual city and the bikes going around in the city. What we're trying to do now is, for example, we're working with the city of New Haven, where they want to calm some of the traffic areas that there is more density of the people going through. And we're going to try rerouting some of those roads so that it'll make sense and we can move the traffic so that it keeps the flow going. At the same time that it keeps the flow going, it'll allow for us to go and integrate the bike lanes, the bike travel. As you've seen in a lot of the European cities, more and more people are using bikes to go and connect to mass transit. Found the same thing when I was down in Florida. We started putting bike racks and bike stations at every one of our train stations down there. And I think that you're going to see much more of this. Down there, it's a little bit easier because you can use a bike 12 months out of the year, 24 hours a day. It's not quite the same here.
That's true. We do have a pretty heavy, cold winter.
Yeah, this winter started off a little mild, but we're getting hit a little bit hard right now.
Yeah. You've said that you've worked in transportation for a really long time, and yes. We have a new administration. And during his during Secretary Buttigieg's confirmation, many people asked, "Are you going to visit my state? These are the concerns of my state." In your opinion, what are the biggest concerns regarding transportation in Connecticut?
Right now, the biggest concern that's hit everybody is, what is the future going to look like? Okay, is it going to come back? One of the things that, I go on a call with the 7 states in the Northeast every 2 weeks, and we talk about, what we're all dealing with in common. For example, the same way the ridership dropped going into New York City for Connecticut, it dropped for New Jersey. The same way that New York City was looking at about 10% occupancy through this whole pandemic, that was going on in Boston. So the biggest questions we're getting hit with right now is, the level of transportation that's out there right now on the trains, is it going to continue? And the governor has come forward with a budget that's keeping it at the level that we're at for at least the next 5 years. And we're also preparing for when ridership starts coming back in stronger, so that we're in a good position for it. And we're also using this as a time to increase all the infrastructure investment that we need to do so that we can go forward. So the questions that we've had and the questions that we've gone forward to our delegation with, we've been very, very fortunate here that we've got key leaders in both the federal end and at the state end that are very aggressive about knowing that they want to see transportation be enhanced and continue. I have a governor who on a regular basis asks, how do we get faster service going in? And the other end of it is, how are we making sure that we're meeting everybody's needs, okay? The needs for the people that are utilizing the buses, rapid transit buses, trains, even the ferry service that's out there. It's to try and make sure that we've balanced out our transportation needs and that we've been very, very good at keeping our federal partners informed. And we've been very, very lucky that we've gotten an awful lot of CARES funding that is allowing us to continue our services.
Thank you. That's really informative. Good to know that what's keeping the trains running. So thank you. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us as well.
Well, thank you very much. And I've got to tell you, I'm very excited about this. Y cuando tú tienes tiempo para conversación en español, necesita practicar la lengua.
¡Ay, qué bueno!
Cuando viven en South Florida, donde 55% de las personas en los barrios hablan español, necesita aprender la lengua.
Sí, usted habla como un italiano.
Ah, no. It's the one I have to learn.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for taking the time for talking with us. This has been really informative, Joe.
No, thank you. And please, anytime there's any questions, please invite me back. Would love to talk to you. We've got a lot of great programs going on. And, we have a lot of opportunity here. And I need people to understand this is a great thing that we're looking at. And we're very, very fortunate to have leaders that want to see transportation enhanced.
Yeah. And that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you, Commissioner Giulietti, for joining us. Tune in next week for another episode. Don't forget to follow us on all of our social media handles, on Twitter at CT Latino News and Instagram at CT_Latino News. I'm Savani Campos with CTLN Opinion Plus. See you next time.